Welcome to the Create What You Speak podcast. Join me as we have a real-life discussion on how to change your life by changing your thoughts. Remember, question everything, trust yourself, and find your truth. Welcome to the Create What You Speak podcast. My name is Sloan Fremont, and I'm your host. Joining me today is Gerry Hussey, author of the book, Awaken Your Power Within. Let go of fear, discover your infinite potential, and become your true self. In his groundbreaking book, Gerry brings us an honest and mind-blowing journey that dares us to ask deeper questions about the mind and soul. Gerry, welcome to the Create What You Speak podcast.
Thank you so much. A pleasure to be with you.
I loved your book. I have to say right off the bat, if there was ever a book that I felt like could help people ask all the right questions, it's all in your book. Like that's what, as I was going through the book, that's what I thought about the whole thing. So let's start out maybe by telling the audience a little bit about yourself and what led you to write your book, Awaken Your Power Within.
I think it's been a life journey, as people in the book will find out. And a lot of people who know me in my adult version as Gerry, this performance psychologist. I've worked a lot with Olympic champions, world champions, European champions. And then I started working in the corporate environment. And then I started doing events for the public around, mindfulness, around the mind-body connection, looking at the neuroscience of the brain. So people would have seen me as this very confident guy that seemed to have his act together.
Right.
But that's only because I was forced to go there. And people who read the book will realize that at the age of 11 was the first time I thought about committing suicide myself, which is a very young age. But anyone who has lived with that heightened anxiety or that, that just that non-stop relentless sense of fear and panic, even though I didn't know what it was, I just knew I couldn't live like this. And between the ages of 11 and 15, I think the biggest challenge I had every day was not to end my own life and to find something to live for. And I had this voice in my own head that says, I was useless and I was worthless and my life didn't mean anything. And I was a failure and I was unloved. And I don't really know at the time where that voice came from. But so at that point, you're faced with, I had to tell my parents. So I just said, something's not right. My heart is racing. I think I'm going to die sometimes. And people who suffer from that level of anxiety will understand that. And I couldn't understand that even when I was in a happy environment. So even at my birthday party, I would be extremely sad, even though I had nothing tangible to be sad about.
Yeah.
And my parents then brought me to every doctor they could find, every GP. And my parents didn't have a lot of money growing up. And I remember at one point they spent over $300 bringing me to a doctor. And I felt so guilty because they didn't really have that money and maybe they borrowed it. I don't know where they got it.
Yeah. But
every doctor was just doing my blood tests. Eventually we got one guy that did a brain scan and everything was coming back normal. Everybody was saying I was healthy. And the pivot point in my life came when at the end of this doctor, we paid $300 for her. They did the brain scans, they did everything. And then he comes back in the room and as he walks into the room, he's reading your notes. He sits down for literally 25 seconds. He looks my mother in the eye and says, good news, this is a perfectly healthy young man. And he goes to stand up as much to say, okay, leave now.
Yeah.
But my mum, being a loving mum, seeing her son crippled with something, not knowing what it was, said, but where are we going to go? What are we going to do? He's not well. And I'll never forget what he said. He said, if you want my honest opinion, this is a perfectly healthy young man, and he's making this up so he doesn't have to go to school.
Oh my God.
That was a kick in the stomach. I felt like a failure. I felt like I'd wasted so much of my parents' time and energy. But the next morning, my mother knew that I'd been crying all night, and she said to me, what's wrong? What's the matter? I said, I just feel like such a failure. I've let everybody down. She said, you haven't let everybody down. And she said, we're going to get to the bottom of this. And when we get to the bottom of this, not only will you be happy, but if you figure this out, and I'll never forget what she said, you could help millions of people.
Oh my gosh, that gives me chills.
I know. And I said to her, but the doctor said there's nothing wrong with me. And my mother, who's an amazing human being, said, If you think I'm taking the word of a doctor I never met over my son,
Mm-hmm.
you don't know who I am.
Mm-hmm.
So at 15, I started looking for books in secondhand bookshops on the mind, the brain. What is the mind? What is the brain? What is anxiety? At the age of 16, 17, I came across this idea of the gut-brain axis. I started understanding that your gut and what we eat plays a huge role in
Right.
our brain.
Mm-hmm.
And I came across this concept of neuroplasticity, that the brain can be reshaped, rebuilt. So everything I've done since is an extension of the world that I was really thrown into. But when I got into it, I just said, wow, everybody should know this. How come we're not being taught this in school?
Right.
And as you know better than me, the science of the body, the science of the brain is so exciting that when we understand it, we become limitless.
Right.
But we're not really taught that.
No, and it all starts to make sense finally. And you know, at the beginning of your book, your story was so powerful. And I won't go too far into it because I want to ask you some other questions, and these interviews always go really fast. But you talk about, you were in the hospital for a period of time and you were surrounded by older people who were on death's doorstep, and how that experience and that understanding changed you. And you mentioned in the book about how when you left the hospital and you went to that coffee shop and you sat there and you were like, I'm going to figure this out, right? I'm going to change. Today is a different day for me. I'm doing something different. And your relentlessness with this, I think I just want to mention this part of it because, having those thoughts of suicide at such a young age, but being relentless for yourself, fighting for yourself, even with those feelings there wanting to bring you down and say, I'm done, it's over. You didn't give in to that. You chose the route to be relentless for yourself and advocate for yourself. And this journey that you've been on, I think that part of it is so inspiring. So I just wanted to touch on that for just a second before we get into the million other questions that I have for you.
Yeah, no, thank you. And I think I was fearless for myself. In my book, I talk about a little exercise where you go back and reconnect with your 8-year-old self. Yeah. I got that. I think I got it from Louise Hay, who was instrumental in my life.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Big help for me too.
And for a long time, I thought I was useless. I thought I was no good. So I had this inner critical voice constantly berating myself and saying things to myself that I'd never said to anybody else, and saying and when I started to listen to this, and really became aware of this narrative that I was building in my head. And then Louise Hay talked about your 8-year-old self. So I literally dug out a picture of myself, which I had very few of, but I dug out a picture of myself when I was 1. And the picture was me standing on a washing machine about to blow out this cake. And I was just this blonde-haired, beautiful little boy who just wanted to be happy.
Yeah.
So I put that picture. And then every time I started to talk negatively, I would look at that child. So sometimes we lose sight of who we are. And I'd love to say I fought for myself. I didn't know who I was, but I fought for that child. I fought for that child to feel loved. I fought for him to smile. And I also fought because it's amazing we know these little ignition moments. My mum said, you could help millions of people. And from the age of 15 or 16, that has been my life's mission.
Yeah. Because
there are too many doctors out there who will examine the physical and they will tell a child, an innocent, beautiful, suffering child, that they are making this up.
Yeah.
So for me, I said, no more. They are not making this up. This is real, and I will prove it's real. And I will also change how medicine view the non-physical.
Yeah.
So it's a mix of being inspired for myself, being fighting for my 8-year-old self, but also knowing that other people have been left in the dark here.
Yeah, that there's something bigger and that you can impact that.
I think so. I think we all have that mission in life. I think we're all born to be of service, and every one of us can change the world if we dare to be brave enough.
Yes, I agree. And that, you talk about that fear and anxiety, and I know that so well. I mean, I think most of the listeners could say the same thing. And you share so much wisdom in your book about how there's something more powerful available to us at any time, right? But most of us, I think one of the biggest realizations for me was when I understood, and I can't remember if it was Louise Hay or who I got that from, but that we didn't have to believe everything that we thought, right? We don't have to believe our own thoughts. I remember fighting with myself 6 months, 9 months, a long time after I heard that. I'm like, that can't be true. Like, yeah. I just couldn't get past that. But once I started to soften up to that, and I was like, wow, like how my world changes completely now. If I accept that I don't have to believe everything I think, right? And so that fear and that anxiety is so powerful. Can you talk about your experience with that and really what you've come to learn about it in your own life?
Yeah, well, I think first and foremost, I think there's a narrative out there that, anxiety or depression is some type of chemical imbalance. Mm-hmm. Show me the evidence. And I've been saying this for 30 years, and I've said it in a room full of doctors and psychiatrists who wouldn't accept it. There's still no evidence.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that for time, or I'm not ruling out, medicine, but there is no evidence. So people have to understand that there is no evidence that can clearly connect physical chemical imbalance. So we have to look a little bit deeper. So anxiety is something to do with the central nervous system. It's something to do with an overactive sympathetic nervous system. So your sympathetic nervous system is a natural inbuilt system that is fight or flight. It's reactionary, right. And it's a defense mechanism. And once we enter into the sympathetic nervous system, our heart rate goes up, our brain starts releasing cortisol, adrenaline, noradrenaline, or adrenal gland spike, our immune system switches down, our breathing rate changes and goes up. Mm-hmm. It's everything that anxiety is.
Right.
So now we begin to realize that everything that is anxiety is simply an overactive sympathetic nervous system. Now, unfortunately, most people have never been told that, and most people don't know the difference between the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. Mm-hmm. So for me, what anxiety is, it's an unresolved fear. Something we heard, something we saw, something we encountered, something we thought about triggered the body into a defensive state of fear.
Right.
And because it has never been resolved, the buttons in the nervous system, in the adrenal glands, in the brain chemistry is constantly keeping us in heightened alert, heightened threat state, waiting until the danger is resolved.
Right.
Now, people need to also know that your brain, your central nervous system, your immune system responds not to what's actually real out there, but you respond in the same way to a perceived threat, the memory of a threat, mm-hmm. as a real threat. So in the absence of a real threat, your body doesn't know it's not real.
Right. And you're running that memory line, and think if you have multiples of those going on at the same time, right? Something with your job, something with your spouse, something with your family or whatever, right? And we have multiple lines of those running at the same time. I mean, it's amazing what we can do to our own selves with our minds. Right.
It's massive. And I think when you use a lovely line there, where you have this narrative, this story, this song playing over and over again. So, when we look at the nervous system, what sends the nervous system into this heightened state of anxiety is either a threat, fear, or simply fatigue. Mm-hmm. Simply fatigue. Mm-hmm. So the body, the mind, the brain can't distinguish between a threat or fatigue. It's all just a load. So the more we become tired, is the more the body tries to keep going. So it starts to drive itself to. And what drives that level of fatigue? Processed food, number one. If we became aware of what's in our food, and I've been saying this for years, food companies need to be tackled. Because now we know stress and processed food are probably the biggest contributors to all deaths on the planet.
Yeah.
So when we look at food, when we look at the intake of caffeine, when we look at, that's the first major stuff that can, because every single cell in your body is made from the food you eat.
Right.
So you literally become what you eat.
Yeah.
So in order to sustain energy, in order to sustain your adrenal glands, in order to have, you're not having this insulin spikes, we need good, healthy, wholesome food. Processed food creates these insulin sugar spikes, which depletes us of energy. So that's one thing. The second thing that gives us great energy, things like meditation, yoga, and breathing. They sound so simple, and yet most people aren't doing these things. So we're pushing, we're going, we're phone, we're email, we're lots of stuff.